Jocelyn.
And I'm Danny.
And this is Why Can't We Talk About It? Welcome to another episode. Danny, how are you doing?
I am doing pretty good. You know, things been good. I've been getting my sleep, which has been very important to me. One of the things, I don't know if I said this to you outside of the podcast or not, but I was thinking the other day how recently I was doing a lot of work where I was waking up much earlier than I'm used to. And I noticed that when I was doing that for a while and I just wasn't really getting enough sleep and being myself, that I felt like my ability or maybe my meter for being compassionate and providing empathy for people kind of went down.
Mm-hmm.
And I never really thought about things like feeling like myself and getting enough sleep could affect certain things like that. So recently I've been like, okay, I gotta be more on point and just get more sleep. And I understand, yes, I can't do it all the time, but knowing that what it can affect was a slight eye-opener for me. So it was good to know.
Yeah.
How about you? How are things on your end?
I am doing good. It is a new month, new year. Feeling like I have lots of goals set and we're back on the pod. We're back to recording. I'm very happy about it.
Me too.
It's also Capricorn season, Danny. We're in your element. It's birthday month.
Yes, I think at this point, I already celebrated my birthday.
Yay.
I'm now 39.
Woohoo. Wow. How do you feel about it?
I feel exactly how I feel when I turned 30, which was, for some reason, when I woke up, when I turned 30, I was like, my body kind of hurts. And whereas up until then, I was fine. So I guess that's an aging thing, or it's in my head. I don't know. But I think I feel good. I think I'm doing all right.
Yay. Okay, good. Maybe we can have an episode about that. What it feels like to hit these sort of like beginning of the next decade birthdays.
Yeah, milestones. And I think just the general aging. I think that's something I would like to talk about that because I've never really explored it, but it'll be nice because I think that's, again, why can't we talk about these kinds of things?
Aging. Let's add it to the episode idea card that we have because it has been on my mind a lot, especially now that I work with somebody who's Gen Z. Today we were talking and she was asking me which holiday movies I had watched this season. And I was sort of listing some and then she was listing some and she asked me if I had heard of this one. And I was like, no, I haven't heard of that. Is it new? And she was like, no, it's old. It's from 2007. And I was like, oh my God. I was like, Rebecca, don't talk to me right now. Old is like Home Alone. Oh, old is like pre 2000. Okay, don't talk to me about 2007 being old. That's a new Christmas movie as far as I'm concerned.
What was it?
I don't even remember. I think I just blacked out a little bit.
Okay. 2007. So that's 15, 16 years ago.
She was probably a child and
yeah.
But as I am saying this, I'm probably like, Home Alone is old. We might have a few listeners that are like, bitch, that is new. I was alive when Miracle on 34th Street was considered a modern Christmas movie.
Mm-hmm.
It's all relative.
It is all relative. To me, old is probably black and white. I think that's how I kind of count it. Yeah, Home Alone doesn't seem like old to me. So you're right. I think it is relative. It just depends on the person.
It is. Okay, well, aging is going onto our episode ideas list. I'm sure there are others out there who are interested.
Yeah, let's do that.
Do you have a recommendation for me this week?
Yes, I do. I was thinking about what to put in as recommendations this week. And I know one time you did tarot cards.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, this is not tarot cards, but it's a card game. I don't know. Are you big into board games, card games?
My family is. Yep.
Yeah? Do you guys have a favorite?
I think we all probably have our personal favorites. I like Exploding Kittens.
Never heard of that.
Oh, it's so fun.
Is it a board game or is it?
It's a card game.
Okay.
I'll send you a link to this after we record.
Yeah, send me a link later. So my recommendation this week is a card game as well. You may have heard of it. It's Monopoly Deal.
Yes.
Yeah, okay. So you know what it is. So for anyone listening that don't know what it is, so Monopoly Deal is, I guess, a card version take on the classic game Monopoly. You're only using cards, and the point of it is to basically collect properties, and you win by collecting 3 sets of properties. So there's no board, there's no dice, there's no actual paper money that's involved, but there are money cards in there. And then there's different things you can do depending on what you get. You can steal things. You can also, I think you can trade and things like that. Actually, I'm not sure. I'll double check. The point is, I really enjoy it mostly because it's still Monopoly and it doesn't take 3 hours to finish like an entire game.
It's so much faster. Yes, exactly. It's great.
Yeah, it is so much faster. So yeah, we'll put a link for anyone who's interested. It's not an expensive game, but it definitely is one that I think, when you just want a game, don't want to take too long and still fun, I think is a good go-to, and it's definitely a go-to in my life. So that's Monopoly Deal. How about you, Jocelyn?
Yes, I do have a recommendation. This came from this past Christmas season when I gave a few of my friends this gift, or rather their children. So if you're like me and you struggle to get gifts for kids, when my friends and sister-in-laws started having kids, I was like, what's in now? Like Legos? I don't want to just get clutter. I want to get something that the kids will enjoy, but also that it won't drive the parents crazy. And I found a really good gift. It's a company called Wonderbly, and what they do is they create personalized books. So they're story books, and I think it's there for kids who are like babies up to age 8. And they do nursery rhymes, they do classics, like I think they have Alice in Wonderland as an option. And they also do books with like a moral or some type of journey or story.
Okay.
I'm so sorry. My dog is drinking water. If you can hear that in the background, I hope you can't hear that because it's kind of funny. To make Danny's life easier, because he's our editor, don't edit that out. That'll drive you crazy. Anyway, these books not only personalize the story by putting the child's name in it. So instead of Alice's Adventures in Wonderland, it would be Rachel's Adventures in Wonderland. They're illustrated, and you can choose what the main character looks like. So you can choose the skin tone and the hair, and it makes it so special because the child sees themselves in the story.
Right.
So I got this for my nephews and a dear friend of mine, her toddler, and the gifts went over well. And I think it's just more special than buying a toy or a doll. You can also put a personalized message in it, and it's something that they can keep forever.
Nice.
Yeah. So let's get into what we're actually going to talk about this week, which is self-worth and being enough. And I'm actually going to let Danny take the lead here because when we were first starting to record, I had a little sidebar with Danny where I said, you know what you want to talk about, right? Because Danny actually came up with this idea and put it in our episode list. And with every recording that we do, we don't prepare ahead of time. We like to keep it very natural, like any other conversation that we'd have. And for this in particular, I really didn't know what I was going to bring to the table. But Danny has a lot of ideas, and I'm curious to hear his take. So Danny, I'm going to kick it over to you to start our conversation on self-worth.
All right. Thank you very much. Actually, one thing I don't think you just mentioned just now, but in our sidebar, before we started recording, you actually said to me, like, oh, I didn't think you had any kind of things to say or necessarily issues, quote unquote, regarding self-worth. So, and I was like, well, we'll see about that. So I guess to kick it off, yes, I was the one who kind of put this in. The idea was from me, but I thought talking about self-worth and just the idea or concept of being enough actually is an important thing to talk about. I don't think it's something that comes up often, nor at all, I think, for a lot of people. When I think about it, I definitely have never really had this conversation with anyone outside of just talking about it here or even in therapy. But even in therapy, it was definitely a bit of a navigation for me because I wasn't really sure how to approach it or talk about it. So when I started therapy, or at least when I was getting ready to, I remember obviously the main thing that I wanted to talk about was regarding behaviors like passive aggressiveness. And we talked about this in our first episode in Origins. But one thing that I may not have talked about was that I actually had made a list of other things that was kind of on my mind. I was like, okay, these are some things. Top of the list was passive aggressiveness. But there were other things underneath where I was like, okay, as I work on things, there are definitely things where I feel like I can work on it as well. For example, some of the things I think I wrote down at the time was just this idea that I felt like sometimes in life I feel stuck and that there's not things moving forward. Or another one was just kind of talking about like, oh, like, is this kind of all there is to life? It feels a bit meh sometimes. Like, is there more to it? And I believe in that list somewhere was this idea of just what self-worth was. What is it? And I imagine that it kind of permeates to other parts of my life. But I want to understand it because without anyone really saying it to me, I felt like the self-worth amount that I had was on the low end. And I know that we're kind of joking about it, but I wouldn't be surprised if between Jocelyn and I, our amount of self-worth, if it was a measurable thing, would be quite different. I'm just going to assume that hers is much higher.
That's literally why I had the sidebar, because I was like, Danny, I have pretty high self-worth and I don't want this to be 45 episodes of me talking about how I know that I am enough and I'm a very confident person. We need to figure this out. Yeah, I think that if we measured it, it would come out different. Okay, we're going to get into this. I don't want to derail this, but I say this to some people in my life who do struggle with it. I wish that you could just see yourself the way I see you. Then your self-worth would be so high.
That's true. Although right off the bat, I'd be like, well, I wonder what that's like, for one. And maybe that is something where people who, I guess, maybe either struggle with it or deal with it is something that they can kind of work towards. It's like a goal. But I think what I want to start off with, though, is just kind of trying to go back a bit and just even talking about what it is. The way I would kind of explain self-worth or this idea of being enough is something that's kind of internalized within me. I don't know what it's like for a lot of people, but I think it's within me where there's this just sense where I kind of feel like I'm not as great as I could be, or I'm not as great in comparison to other people. And this could go, I guess, any kind of way, I suppose. It's like, oh, me as a person, or me comparing and thinking about, like, oh, how I look, or how I live my life, or how I treat people, or how people treat me. I guess another way some people can maybe look at it too is like confidence or self-esteem. But I think self-worth kind of really encapsulates everything. And then also, I feel like it kind of goes hand in hand with being enough because, well, what does being enough mean if I was to ask somebody? And I think as I've done sessions in therapy and read more about it, my understanding of just being enough really is understanding that me as a person is enough and has value and is worth people's time to, be friends, be in relationships and so forth, and just be me. However, if I don't feel like I'm enough, then there are certain things that are going to happen where I feel like, oh, I need to be extra nice to people, or maybe I'm only friends with people because I buy them gifts, or there's some kind of monetary value to it, or I have to do certain things that are beyond just being me. So it's almost like,
Compensatory. You feel like you have to compensate.
yes, it's like I have to compensate for who I am. Otherwise, people aren't going to like me. Otherwise, people don't want to be around me. And that's just not a great feeling, but it's a feeling that I think, from my understanding at least, is that it takes time to get there. Like, I'm not born feeling like, oh, my self-worth is so low. It's like, oh, I'm not enough. Like, I wasn't a baby and I thought that way. It takes, I think, years of certain way of growing up or living to get to this point.
I have a couple questions.
Sure, go ahead.
You said that you compare yourself to others, but you also think I'm not as great as I could be. So that's two different things. That's hard. You're comparing yourself to what you see around you, but there's also some inner conflict. Is it that you're comparing who you are, the kind of person you are, or the things you do?
I think it's a mixture. I think sometimes I would go, oh, okay, I see people, whether this is like through different ways of media, and I just go, oh, look at that, they're so successful. And also, like, what does that mean, right? Oh, somehow they have more fame, they have more money, they live a certain lifestyle. Maybe they live in a big house. And maybe there are these unconscious ideas of what being a good person or being successful is. And I think when there's issues of self-worth and being enough, it's more like, oh, I'm looking at these outside forces and being like, oh, I need to be like that. Otherwise, I'm a piece of crap. And I think that's what happens with lower self-worth or not feeling like you're enough, because obviously I can understand that, yeah, not everybody lives like that. And as far as I can tell too, even people who live like that, they may not feel that great about themselves from what I've kind of learned over the last year or two. People who look like they're very happy and successful on the outside from what I can see, but on the inside, probably not. So to your question, it is a mix, how I see someone live, how I see someone conduct themselves. If I don't feel good about myself, I think one of the ways to look at it is to go, okay, how do I get out of this? Oh, so-and-so, I perceive them as doing well. Let me try and do more of that. But that's not necessarily meaning that it's me. I'm still trying to emulate someone else. And I think the self-worth portion is I'm moving farther and farther away from authenticity of who I am. And I believe there's a bit of a, again, goes hand in hand, where if I'm not being authentic, then I'm not being myself. And that means I probably feel less comfortable in my own skin. And so I feel worse about myself. And I just overall feel like, oh, I'm just not great.
That leads me to my second question. And I'm wondering if you are planning on sharing this. How do you think that happened? Because like you said, none of us are born coming into this world thinking, oh, I'm just not good enough. What kinds of things did you have to learn to start thinking that way?
Great question. So for me, I think I touched on this maybe partially in our early episode regarding childhood emotional neglect, but it seems like this is a pretty common place where that happens. So I'm just going to use myself and just give my examples and my stories. So I can't remember if I even mentioned this in that episode, but in my therapy work, there is one pivotal moment that keeps coming up over and over again in my conversations. Even though I'm talking about different things, it tends to go back to this one thing. And what it is when I was 9 years old, my family, we had taken a road trip out east. And I think it was a trip around 2 weeks. And I remember on the way there, I feel like the mood was great. Everyone's having a good time, talking, laughing, and everything. And I remember listening to music, and I was 9, but I was dancing and singing all that stuff. However, on the way back, even though I was still doing that, I kind of look back and kind of understand that I think the mood may have been a little bit different. I think for my parents, they were like trying to get home, and the mood was a bit maybe more quiet. And I think they probably wanted more quiet, but me, just being authentically me, I was still enjoying the music and I was still singing and dancing. And at one point, my dad, who was in the driver's seat, he reached behind where I was, and he just like really just like pinched my thigh, like super hard. It was very quick, but it caught me off guard. And it was, I remember looking down, I got silent, and I saw that almost immediately my leg was bruised. And so my dad did that. And my mom also just didn't do anything. She just kind of like let that happen. And my memory of it was I was shocked. I didn't understand what just happened because I was now in pain and my dad was the one who physically hurt me. I think this is a very pivotal moment because when that happened, I got quiet and then the rest of the car ride home was quiet, but there was never any kind of, like, it was never addressed again, ever. I'm talking like even like decades later. I don't think that was ever talked about. And so in my therapy work and just reading about what those things could mean to me, it was almost like this. As a 9-year-old, your parents are kind of like the world to you. You assume that they love you and you want them to love you and you love them back. And so in that moment, I don't think I, as a child, understood that there is even a remote possibility that my dad, who I looked up to and love and care for, could possibly hurt me physically. And so at that age too, from what I know too, like as kids, you want to make sense of what's happening in your life. If I couldn't really accept that, because that would be crazy to think like, what? My parents, my dad, like actually is someone who's going to hurt me, then my only real alternative that makes the most sense is, oh, well, I'm a bad kid and I messed up and therefore that's why he did this. Years later, I can look back at that event and go, yes, my dad was probably stressed out. He's driving for weeks. He's tired. He's probably irritated. That's probably what he was feeling. It doesn't excuse what he did. I'm sure there's many other ways to address that. He did it the way he did. My mom behaved the way she did by not doing anything about it. And so because they never talked about it again, and that was generally how my home life was, I just had to make up things in my head to accept and understand my world, which was, oh, I'm not a good kid. That's why they do these things. I think what that also kind of meant underneath is like, well, if I'm not that great, then maybe I'm not really worthy of what their love is to me as a kid. And that slowly, I think, erodes or adds to this idea that, oh, I'm not really worthy or valuable or just not worth their time. In my mind, it's like, well, if I was enough, why would they do that? And so therefore, I must not be enough. And I think that is where in my memory, such a thing of, oh, self-worth being a problem, being enough being a problem started. That, of course, kind of keeps going. Like, I think I have other things that kind of happened. Even as I grew up, that kind of leads up to another time in my life, which was around the high school, university time. And I think this is relevant because I don't know how it is for everybody else, or even for Jocelyn, but high school was all right. But I was for those who are in Canada and know the system from that point, we had something called OAC, which means that in high school, you have 5 years. My graduating class was the one where they were kind of taking that away. So it was like, I think they call it a double cohort where 2 grades were basically going to graduate at the same time. For my grade, we had the option of fast tracking, meaning we finished high school in 4 years. And I remember I was on the phone with my mom around that time because I think we had to make a choice where either we fast track and finish high school in 4 years or you stay another year and then you graduate with another set of people. And I knew that I did not want to fast track, mainly because I think the majority of my friends were all staying an extra year. So I was like, well, why the hell do I want to leave first? You know, I don't want to be a sucker that leaves first and goes off to university or college. So I told my mom, like, yeah, so I think I prefer to just, stay another year. I don't want to fast track. And she's like, no, you're going to fast track. You're gonna go. And I was like, oh, but I don't really want to. And she's like, well, you're gonna. I'm missing a lot of context, but for certain parts of my life, that was kind of how those interactions went. And so I finished high school, and I remember it was the summer before going out to university. And even during that summer, I remember trying to attempt one more attempt at maybe not going. I don't know if it's common these days, but I know that people did a gap year. So between high school and university, you take a year off before you kind of go to university. I remember there's one day where my dad was there. We were at the table, and I was like, okay, I don't think this is going to work, but I'm going to try. So I said, oh, hey, Dad, I've been thinking, yes, I understand I've applied for university, but I think I really like it if I could just let me take a year off and just kind of do my thing and explore before going into university. I know he heard me because he looked up at me and we made eye contact. But he looked at me in a way where I was like, I knew what his answer was because he didn't actually end up saying anything. He looked up, looked at me, gave me a look, and then put his head back down, continued what he was doing. He never said a word. He never said anything. And I was like, okay, I know what that means. It means keep your mouth shut and get your ass to school. Those moments, which I actually talked about in therapy, my therapist was like, how did that feel? And I go, I just felt like it was another moment where my opinions do not matter. I'm only here expected to do the things that my parents wanted me to do. Don't get me wrong. There are certain things where they do let me do, but I think when it came to like big life decisions, it was always whatever they had expected of me, that's the way it's going to go. And so when you have, or at least the way I take it is, when you have these big life choices where you're trying to like find yourself, understand yourself, but whenever you try to express it and you're kind of shut down, and like I said, where I go, okay, my understanding is my opinions don't matter. And so if my opinions don't matter, I take that as, okay, well, that means my words don't have value. And underneath it, it means I, as a person, Danny, don't have value. And I think it's stuff like that where doubt, self-doubt will happen. And I go, man, how can I feel good about myself if I am not valued for being me? And if I try to be me, I'm basically told, don't be you. We're going to tell you how to live your life. Even as from 9 years old up until then, it's like, okay, well, there's no way I'm enough as a person if my parents, who are my parents, find that everything I want to do is not good enough. It's like, no. What you want to do, that's not good. I'll tell you what's good. Those are just some examples. And I think that led to just more stuff. Like my university career, I guess is what it's called. I hated it. I spent 4 years there in school. I just never enjoyed it. I think there was a resentment. Those 4 years of being like, I'm here, but I'm kind of forced to be here. So I'm actually going to not make the most of it. I'll skip class here and there. I won't try hard. Maybe I'll go into details another day. But at one point, I think I was doing so poorly that I almost got kicked out. So there was a lot of things that came from that. I think that was to just give a more of explanation, a snippet, to be like, hey, there are things that leads up to how someone could possibly have doubts about self-worth of them being enough, and it comes from somewhere. And I'm sure it's not a topic we talk about a lot, but I would say, hey, if I just talking to Jocelyn, I'd be like, you know what? I'll bet you our childhood growing up was not like this. There's no way that Jocelyn's life could have mirrored what I just said. It probably sounds very foreign to her. Am I correct?
Yes. And I'll give you an example that holds a mirror up to show you how my experience was the complete opposite of yours. But first, I just want to thank you for sharing and being so vulnerable and painting a picture. I think it's really eye-opening, and it really helps me understand how you can feel like not enough and the steps that it took to get you to that place. After I give you an example and we sort of contrast and compare, I do want to ask if there are things that your therapist had you work on to start to feel like you are enough and what that might look like. I wanted to give you an example about your university experience. So for me, I went to university. I went to Laurier. That's in Ontario. That's in Canada. I was going to go with my best friend. We went together and I had really high hopes. And probably within the first couple of weeks, I knew that it wasn't for me. I think it was probably one of the first times I made a decision where I felt it in my body. You know, when people say like, you can feel it in your gut, you can feel it physically, I knew that staying was not the right choice for me. It was hard for so many reasons for me to even think that leaving was an option. For a perfectionist like me, it was unfathomable to quit something just like that. up to that point, I had done everything with my best friend. I know I throw the term best friend around a lot because I have 7 best friends, but she was like, we were best friends. She was my soulmate. Like we had done everything together. So the thought of leaving her was so painful. It just felt like the most overwhelming time in my life. It probably was up until that point. The thought of quitting, I just would have felt like a complete failure. I also knew it would cost my parents thousands of dollars. They generously paid for my undergrad. My parents knew that I was suffering. I stuck it out. I think I only lasted a couple months. If that, I didn't finish my first semester. And my parents were supportive of me leaving. And my dad said, you're not even going to remember this. In a year from now, this isn't going to matter. The money doesn't matter.
Wow.
Come home, reevaluate. And I was like, but what if I don't get into school again? I'm wasting a year of my life. And he was like, you're going to come home. You're going to figure it out. You will pick up. You're 18. This is so inconsequential. This is the right thing for you to do. We support you. You have a home to come back to. I can drive up there tomorrow. We'll pack all of your stuff and bring you home.
Wow.
That's what we did.
That is an amazing support system you got going on there.
Yeah. So I'm not going to go into like childhood examples and stuff, but that probably gives you a good idea of what my support system was like as a child growing up.
Yeah, I think that really contrasts it because I guess the same idea is that when I was struggling in school and just not doing well for many reasons, including the fact that, I just didn't want to be there, that obviously affected my grades. And I think that when grades were getting hit, I just kind of suffered in silence on my own. I think it may have occurred to me, but I knew like the idea of telling my parents like, hey, I don't like this, it's not working, and I don't want to be here. Obviously, if I even told them already before I even went, I didn't want to go, and they reacted the way they did, I did not see how it would work in my favor if I was like partway through, it was like, hey, I actually still don't like it, and I'd rather not be here. I understood that even without it being said, that there was an expectation that it needs to be done. There is no option. There is no universe where Danny does not finish university. Like that was the expectation and it has to be done. I mean, I did graduate, and I guess to go from almost being kicked out to getting back in and graduating was a feat in itself. When I look back at those times, it's still not great. It still wasn't a time where I think I see people talk about it like, ooh, great times, a lot of friends, and these are my lifelong friends going forward. I'm like, nope, none of that. It was just 4 years of like, why am I here? And just kind of dealing with that. Thank you for the contrasting comparison. It's weird because for me, I only know what I know. It's only when I talk to people like Jocelyn or hear from other people's stories where I go, you know what? There is different ways of doing it. And although sometimes I'm like, it kind of sucks because I was like, oh, there are better ways of doing it. And I didn't get to experience that. I am in a way glad that other people had more positive experiences. And that's a nice thing. In regards to, I think your question, which is, what have I learned through therapy or on my own in regards directly to self-worth and being enough, or what have I worked on and whether or not there's been any improvements? What I will say is I don't recall necessarily working on that one thing of self-worth. Like I said, because it permeates through so many other things. I think if I want to, I'm pretty sure I can explain that a little bit into behavior being passive aggressive or how I view relationships and things like that. So I think I actually worked on other more concrete things. I feel like self-worth was something that wasn't something I worked on specifically. However, in terms of improvements, I would say that, yeah, there's been some. It's really small steps for me. I think I have a long way to go. However, knowing that there's some improvements, I would say does give me a bit of hope that maybe one day I can have what is equivalent to Jocelyn to get to know what that feels like. I think it does go really deep for me too. So I'm going to give an example. Even for this one, I kind of want to say it, but I think it just really illustrates the depth of any kind of doubt in self-worth and being enough. So recently, I was at the mall with Andrea. We were in a store just kind of browsing, and there was a section where towels were on sale. And just usual, bath towel and so forth. She was like, hey, do you want to pick up some? And I was like, hell yeah, let's get some. Let's pick up a couple. It's on sale. I felt it. I was like, ooh, this feels nice. I'm, looking forward to using these at one point. And we picked it up. And then we're at home. And then she goes, so what made you want to pick those up? And I think one of the reasons why she asked that question was because in the past, even just the recent past, I think we've been around other stores with towels. Same question. She's asked me, do you want to pick some up? But in the past, I would say, no. It's okay. It's okay. I have. I don't need to pick up anymore. So this time around, though, I think she was curious. Like, oh, this time I asked you the same question. You said, sure, let's pick some up. I said, oh, well, I think because, I have old towels and, they're okay, but I think it's nice to get some new ones. Plus, these are on sale. And she goes, okay, cool. And then I was kind of thinking about that question a little bit later. And I'm sure by the time this podcast episode airs, I'll kind of explain it to her. But what I didn't really recognize at the time is that the reason, those reasons were valid, but the reason underneath why this time I was okay with getting new towel was because I felt like I deserved it this time. I think that sounds really sad, and it is. I'm sure if I heard this from anyone else, I'd be like, oh man, it's just towels. To feel like you deserve towels in a way goes, oh, up until now, you didn't deserve it. And it's like, who doesn't deserve new towels? I think this is an illustration of how deep it goes. I guess how it even permeates into things that are, I think for the general public, is very inconsequential. Like, it's just towels. But there's something in me where I go, I didn't deserve it until now. And that's how far it goes. Another example, I think this also kind of adds to it, but maybe a little bit more positive too, is, so Jocelyn knows that I go on Reddit a lot. For those who don't know, it's basically like a website with forums with different subgroups and categories where people have, news, hobbies, and so forth. I have been on Reddit in terms of just like reading it and reading what people write and post for probably a decade now. And in that time, I've never actually contributed. I'd never written anything. I never posted. I was always just reading what other people wrote. However, recently, there was something that kind of changed where I was like, I'm going to start posting and responding to people. And I was like, it's weird. I did it for a few days. I'm like, I wonder why I'm doing it now. I thought about it some more. I've now kind of realized that my voice has value. I think that I feel good enough about myself to say, hey, if I have these things to say, these words to give to people, especially for those who are maybe looking for advice, I think what I have to say is valuable and it means something to me and to give to other people. Whereas up until then, I was like, no, anything I have to say, I don't think it's any good. That's why I'm always just taking in what other people are putting out. I noticed these two changes. I'm hoping there'll be more. I'm hoping that what I've said so far, what people have heard, it takes you from more the very beginning to what it's like for me now very recently. On the exterior, Jocelyn's known me for years now. There's no way you can look at someone and go, oh, all these things are happening within that person. You just can't tell by looking at it. And I think that's something where I know I have to be mindful too, because I don't know what other people are going through. But at the same time, I realize that other people have no idea what's going on within me. And I just wanted to bring a little bit of awareness and give an example from my own life to show like, hey, I think people go through these things, but no one really talks about it. I think it's important that we do.
Danny, I'm so proud of you. I want to tell you that you deserve all the towels. You should definitely write back and share to people asking questions on Reddit because you are a great communicator. You have the most thoughtful responses out of anybody I know when you answer questions or respond to messages. I think with each time that you recognized something about yourself that is worthy, I hope you take a moment to really internalize it because that's you looking at younger Danny and being like, this was me all along. You've heard of affirmations, I'm sure, right? Mm-hmm. I've read that it actually is impactful to repeat positive affirmations because it changes those neural pathways in your brain and you actually start to believe it. So I know that waking up and looking in the mirror and being like, you are one sexy, hot man might feel cheesy. Repeating affirmations to yourself when you recognize these small things, even remembering these moments, I think will be so helpful. And I hope if our listeners can relate to what you're going through, what Danny just shared, finding these moments where you realize that you deserve something or your voice is valuable or any of these sort of light bulb moments, repeat them to yourself. I guarantee you, the people around you who love you think that about you every single day. Like I said, Danny, I wish that you could see yourself the way that I do. You are such a good friend. You are an amazing person. You're so funny. You make me laugh all the time. You're one of the first people I want to call to share exciting news or a funny story. You grew out awesome pandemic hair. I don't think anyone could rock a hairband the way that you do. You are just so awesome. And I love you. And I hope that you can internalize that and that worthy Danny can start to come out more and more every day because that's you.
Mm-hmm.
And for all of our listeners, I hope the same for them. I hope that if this is something that they're struggling with, they can start to be a bit more gentle and kind with themselves, give themselves a little bit more grace, and start to recognize their own worthiness.
I agree. Thank you very much for the kind words. I do appreciate that. And even that, not to take that away or anything like that, but even hearing that, I'm like, oh, it's interesting to take that in and to be like, oh, that's nice. But even with that, this small bit, I'm like, oh, does that make sense to me? Or does that feel a bit weird too? So I think that's, again, all part of it. Something that I do want to work on so that I can fully accept it without feeling awkward or weird about it.
You want to get to the place where you're like, oh, I know.
Something like that, yes. that would be kind of nice. And just to see what it's like to live on the other side like you do. Again, thank you for those words. I do appreciate that. And I do want to just kind of add to the sentiment that, yeah, I think there are probably people who will listen to this, whether it's for you personally or someone that you know. I think it's important that we are more aware. As we've said before in the past episodes, awareness is the first step to kind of get you going, to understand yourself, and hopefully to get you a point where you can live and thrive fully in your road in life.
All right. I think that's a good place to wrap it up.
Yeah, I think so too. Thank you, everybody, for listening to this episode of Why Can't We Talk About It? We will talk to you all next week.
Talk to you next week.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.